Okay, well, we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm sure we'll have a few more joining us, but I would like to welcome you to major types of insurance that businesses should have. We have our presenter today from Guaranteed Rate Insurance. His name is Michael NG, and he is going to explain to us the different types of insurances and uses, etc. First, I want to tell you a little bit about SCORE. SCORE offers webinars, workshops. We have training, that we offer. We have tools and templates and things to share with folks. And the most important task that we have is to offer free mentoring. We have free and confidential mentoring to anyone that wants to start a business or already is in business. All of our mentors are volunteers and come from different backgrounds, so that we have a wide range of expertise and experiences that we can share with our clients. The wonderful thing about SCORE is that we are a national organization. And if for any reason we can't help you at a chapter level or answer your questions at a district level, we can reach out to those 10,000 plus volunteers to try and make sure that we can assist you the best way that we can. How do you get a mentor? You may be wondering. Well, lots of different ways you can do that. First of all, you can go to one of the websites listed there, and I will put those in chat after my opening comments. Those are the chapters in our district. There's a Find a Mentor tab there. You'll find tools and templates, library sources. You'll find recordings and past webinars as well on that website. Otherwise, you can put a little note in chat. I'm happy to make sure that the right chapter reaches out to you. Or you can email me, and I will also put that email in chat as well, and let me know that you're interested in somebody contacting you, and I will have the right chapter reach out to you. If you already have a SCORE mentor and it's been a while, reach out to them, let them know what you're up to. We'll let them know what's going on. They're great for bouncing new ideas off of or helping you get to that next step that you want to achieve with your business. We are going to try and use the Q&A tab, please. It just allows me to keep track of your questions. Sometimes in the chat there can be several people putting comments in, and I questions can get lost. I will try and pull them out of chat if you only get them into chat, but please try and use the Q&A tab. It just makes things a little bit easier for me. Okay, that's all I have on SCORE. I'm going to go ahead and stop my share and turn it over to our presenter.
Thank you, Teresa. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, SCORE Boston, for having me today. I'm Mike Ging, and I am the Territory Manager of Northeast at Guaranteed Rate Insurance. I've been in the insurance industry for about 9 years now. Originally grew up in New York City, and my family and I moved to New England in 2013. Currently, I am living in Derry, New Hampshire, with my wife, Alyssa, and 2 kids, Dylan and Aubrey. So today, I'm excited to have the opportunity to bore everyone to death by talking about insurance. Just like Flo from Progressive, as some of you might have came across from the commercial recently. And no worries, this presentation will only take 4 hours. No, I'm joking. I think Teresa only allowed me an hour slot. So, but I would like to talk to you about what type of what typically a small business would need for insurance and some major types of property and casualty insurance. And when I say property and casualty, often referred as P&C, I'm really talking about your property, such as your business belongings, your buildings, and your liability coverage, not your life and health, as I'm not licensed to do those. So, all right, so let's dive right in. I like to be a little bit more interactive And so I am going to begin by asking the audience some poll questions. So the first poll we have is, how many years have you been in the business? Please choose one. 0 to 1, I mean less than 1 year, 2 to 4 years, or 5 or more. If you have not started your business yet but is looking to do so, then you can choose 0 to 1. We'll give it a minute here as some of the answers are rolling back in. And this will give us a better idea of what type and experience our audience have today.
Yep. I ended the poll there.
Okay.
So we have the results right there.
Okay, awesome.
So it looks
And
like
then
we've
the
got
second,
40% at 0 to 1 year. And then it looks like the majority are in a different business than what we listed.
yeah. Awesome. I tried to explore as much, think of as much industry as possible. All right. Well, awesome. Thank you so much for your answers. Again, I think hopefully this would get me a sense of who our audience are today and how this presentation could relate to your business. So let's begin. Some major types of property insurance. So let's begin by talking about, so there are 4 different types of business insurance I think a small business should need. You have general liability insurance, property insurance, workers' comp, commercial auto, commercial umbrella, your cyber liability, and your professional liability. I also want to mention that oftentimes you might see a small business as a business owner's policy, also referred as a BOB. This policy covers both property and liability all in one policy. It's great for small businesses because it's usually less expensive than purchasing standalone separate policies. And it often includes some added coverages, just like all your bells and whistles. And it's just like an off-the-shelf policy. However, the disadvantage of that is the limits may not be as high as standalone package policies. And standalone policies tend to be tailored to the client's own individual risk. So let's talk about general liability. General liability typically covers the client for claims involving bodily injuries and property damage resulting from the client's from your product, services, and operations. This is sometimes referred as your slip and fall coverage. And oftentimes I hear people get confused between general liability and professional liability. There are huge differences between the two, in which I will get into later on in this presentation. So now, if you're doing any of these, I would highly recommend you to speak with either an insurance agent or a broker to get yourself a general liability policy. If you or your employees are interacting with clients face-to-face, whether if you are visiting the client's workplace or if your client is visiting yours, there's always a possibility that someone can get hurt causing bodily injury. Having access to your customer's property. If a customer's property is to damage at your location or on your job site, this policy can cover the cost to repair or to replace. Using advertisement to market your company. If you promote your company and accidentally use wording that is under copyright or trademark, this policy could cover you. Also, this policy can cover any defamation claims against you or your employees. So, for example, a local restaurant owner goes on social media and says, Chick-fil-A put sawdust in their chicken. So Chick-fil-A has the right to file a defamation claim against you, against the restaurant owner. Now, we all know Chick-fil-A wouldn't do that because I personally love Chick-fil-A. But this is when your general liability policy could come in and protect the business by covering the legal fees, the court fees, and any settlement or judgment, regardless of fault. Then you have the third-party location for business-related activities. A lot of small business owners should need this due to this requirement. A lot of small business are renting a space that they can operate their business out of, and that is when the landlord most of the time will require this type of policy. And lastly, this goes with a lot of our contractors. Typically you would need at least a general liability policy to cover, in order for you to go out and propose or bid for contracts. Then we go on to property, commercial property. This covers your building and any business-related properties, such as your computers, furniture, signs, fence, important documents, your inventory, and your customer's property. Please keep in mind, though, especially here in Northeast, earthquakes and floods are typically not covered in your policy. You would either have to get a standalone policy or have it requested added to your policy. Most of the time, it's a standalone policy. You have to get an additional policy. How is the property policy rated? Well, an underwriter would look at 4 things, what we abbreviate as COPE. First, you have the construction, the material of the building, occupancy, what is the building used for, what kind of tenants are in there. For instance, a restaurant tenant is probably going to be rated more than an office tenant. As far as theft protection, whether if the building has a fire sprinkler alarm system or burglar alarm. And lastly, exposure. Where is the building located? How far is it from the coast? So those are just a couple of things that an underwriter that would factor into a property premium. Then we move forward to important property endorsements that I encourage everyone to have on their either business owner's policy or property policy. And when I say endorsements, I mean add-on coverages. So imagine if you are going to a dealership and buying a brand new car, you want all the bells and whistles, you want the sunroof, you want the new leather seating, etc. So that's what an endorsement really means in the insurance world. First, you have a business income. If a fire or another covered peril was to damage the property at the location, forcing your business to shut down, you can obviously suffer a significant amount of business income loss. One of the first things when I meet with all my clients, I always begin by asking them, do you have a backup plan for your business in case you are forced to shut down? How are you going to make payroll? So those type of, so business income would protect you from those incidents. Extra expense, that kind of comes hand in hand with business income. This is for any additional cost that you incur during the time you continue to operate your business while repairs are ongoing, or that you need to rent different equipment, or even move into a temporary location. The sewer backup endorsement covers the cost of repairing and replacing either your building or your personal property damaged by sewer water. And then next, you have utility interruption that would protect you if the business is to shut down due to any electricity, gas, water, and communication services. Spoilage for our restaurant and hospitality folks. This is obviously very important for you. Food that are stored in the fridge or in the freezer may be spoiled due to power outage. You would need this in order to cover any food that's been spoiled. One important thing that I would urge you is to review your policy to see how is this calculated. Is it covered by an inventory cost or retail? Because obviously there's a huge difference. Equipment breakdown, that covers any machinery, steamers, boilers, your refrigerator, microwave due to power outage, etc. Electronic data processing. This is the software that a business uses in order to operate their business. Lastly, employee theft. This covers when an employee steals cash, food, or other property that belongs to the employer. I once had a restaurant owner who owns about 15 locations. One of his GMs stole $27,000 from him. It took him about 9 months to discover that. So luckily enough, he had a $25,000 minus $1,000 deductible limit under his policy. So he was able to recover most of his damages. Do we have any questions so far? I'm sure we're moving a little bit too fast here. Or
No, I do have a question here that I can give you. Does this property insurance apply if I work from my home office 100%?
It's not required. However, you may want to look into your homeowner's policy. Some homeowners policy would extend your business property related equipment, such as your computer, your printers. I would start off from there if you are looking to cover those properties. If not, then you'll be able to get a standalone property coverage for those equipment working from home.
Okay, I think the next question we'll save because it's a little bit more general.
Okay, awesome. So we will move on to workers' comp. But before we do that, I would like to ask the audience another question. How many employees do you have, including yourself? 1, 2 to 5, 6 to 10, 11 or more. Okay, so the majority of the audience are has no employees. Okay, awesome. Great, thank you so much for your answers. So please keep in mind, this is just for Massachusetts only. All employers operating in Massachusetts are required to carry a workers' compensation policy for their employees, except household workers who work less than 16 hours per week. independent contractors who do not work under the direct supervision of the employer, and volunteers. Those are the only folks that shouldn't be required to carry workers' comp. The maximum weekly benefit is 60% of the gross average weekly wage for temporary total benefits, and maximum 75% for partial benefits. Compensation won't begin till after 5 days. On the 6 days, that's when compensations are calculated, unless if the employee can't work for 21 days or more. Any employers who are found in non-compliance would be fined a minimum of $100 per day. And what factors into a workers' comp premium? Gross annual payroll, your location, number of employees, the industry you're in, so it also, or the employee's role for the company. A receptionist is probably going to be rated lower than, for instance, a contractor, because the risk factor. Coverage limits and the claim history for the business. Now, to continue, workers' comp covers your medical costs, lost wages due to work-related injuries, and death benefits. In many states, most workers' compensation policies include employer's liability, which protects the employer from an injured worker or their family member filing a lawsuit against them. This policy would cover attorney fees, court fees, or any judgments or settlements. Now, I know this is probably the million-dollar question now, is does workers' compensation cover employees who contracted COVID-19? I wish I have an answer for you, but it depends. Generally speaking, workers' comp does not cover any routine community spread illnesses such as a virus, because you can't prove or you can't detect that the employee was infected at the workplace. However, in recent cases, there are some states that have extended the workers' comp coverage to include COVID-19. Recently, a California court ruling allowed a death lawsuit to proceed with an employee of See's Candies who was infected by coronavirus, who then gave it to her husband. Her husband, unfortunately, later died from the virus. So, and keep in mind, this was a case in California. However, some legal experts are saying that they're expecting some states and courts to follow this ruling. So we shall see. But as of right now, generally speaking, in states like Massachusetts and New Hampshire, would generally not be covered. We have seen the states have extended certain coverages on a case-by-case basis, specifically for first responders and healthcare workers. Moving along, we have commercial auto. For small businesses, the line between what is considered a personal auto policy and a commercial auto policy, it's often confusing. I have folks who ask me oftentimes, well, should I get a personal policy or a commercial policy? Sometimes, and I understand that small business owners and employees use their personal vehicles for business purposes. For example, they may use it to travel to job sites, transport goods and equipment. But please keep in mind, personal auto insurance policies almost always exclude business use. That means you're not covered if you get into an accident while driving for work, with the exception of your commute. So if you are driving to commute, that should be okay. That should be fine. So then the question is, well, which policy covers multi-purpose vehicles and who really needs commercial auto? You should get a commercial auto if the vehicle is owned, rent, or leased by a business. The auto is operated by employees, or even though the vehicle is not owned by the business, but it is used to conduct business, such as to transport goods and equipment, driving clients or employees around, perform a service that you're paid for, charging passengers for a fee to ride in your car, charging people a fee to transport goods, hauling heavy work-related loads, or towing a trailer used for businesses. And then to carry on to commercial auto further, what are some factors that underwriters look into when rating a commercial auto policy? What type of industry you're in, the type of vehicles you have, the number of vehicles. For instance, a business who has 5 or more vehicles, what we consider a fleet, would actually be surprisingly that each vehicles are rated lower compared to a business who has 4 or less vehicles. How often the vehicles are driven, employees' driving records, the type of coverage you choose, the limits you choose, and again, the claim history of the business. One important thing I want to know is you should always have this endorsement. It's called hired or non-owned auto coverage, HNOA. This provides a liability coverage while driving your own or leased vehicle for work purposes. If you don't have a commercial auto, you can always add this coverage in your business owner's policy. Then we have commercial umbrella policy. An umbrella policy provides just an extra layer of liability protection by covering the same cost of your other liability coverage. It's usually an increment of millions. So a $1 million coverage could cost as little as a few $100 a year. But keep in mind, you can't just get a standalone policy. You have to have another liability, such as a general liability policy to go along with it. And with how high legal fees and settlements are nowadays, I always recommend all of my clients to carry an umbrella policy. An umbrella policy covers the same type of costs that other business liability insurance, such as your medical expense, your attorney fees, or any damages, settlements, and judgment. Then we have cyber insurance. This cyber insurance typically provides first and third party. This means that it covers your business, also covers your customers' information or any liability claims as well. It typically covers your business liability for data breach involving sensitive information that belongs to your customers, such as their social security number, the credit card number, their account number, their bank info, driver license, or even health and medical records. What does a cyber insurance do? What does this policy do? So aside from covering any legal fees and expense, this would also help you notifying your customers about the data breach, restoring personal identities of your customers, recovering compromised data, and repairing damaged computer systems. If you are either accepting credit cards or checks and forms of payments, or have possession of your client's personal data, you should have a cyber policy. And then lastly, we have the professional liability, also called an E&O insurance. This is to protect the business against the cost of client's lawsuit over unsatisfactory work. How is this different from general liability? Think of it this way. General liability covers physical damage, anything that physically harms someone, while professional liability covers any financial damages. GL covers finished work that that a contractor might have completed that could cause bodily injury or property damage to somebody. And professional is just dealing with a financial claim, loss claim of someone due to your service or products. Some common professions that who may need professional liability are your accountants, engineers, insurance brokers like myself, lawyers, architects, consultants, and doctors. Several factors that would factor into this policy is what type of industry you're in, the limits and deductible that you're asking for, the size of your business, your day-to-day operation, and again, the claim history of the business. And I think we are done with the presentation here, and leaving some time for Q&A.
Yeah, and I'm going to try and group the questions by section as much as I can. So
Okay.
Going back to the original general liability, when you talked about equipment breakdown, that is meant specifically due to circumstances beyond control, not wear and tear. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Usually it's due to power outages.
Okay. What does it mean to be bonded? Who needs that? I am a home and business organizer, and I have been considering offering packing services so that the movers can find everything ready. What coverage would I need for that?
Bonding is a little different from P&C. I think there are several types of bonding. There's like surety bonds, but I would probably need a little bit more information in terms of the audience who is asking about bond. I'm not sure of that right on top of my head. But feel free to contact me if the person wants to discuss.
Okay. What if the business has no location and it's only an LLC working from home?
Well, then you probably wouldn't need general liability, because unless if you are expecting a client to visit your office, what I would probably encourage is to get a property policy. But as I noted earlier, you may want to first check with your homeowner's policy, because there are some policies out there that would cover business-related equipment. If you don't have any, if you have an employees, you definitely would need a workers' comp policy, and any auto coverage that you may need. And again, well, if you don't have your general liability, then probably you won't get your umbrella policy. So I think the property would probably be a good start.
Okay, workman's comp. What if you have no employees and it's just yourself?
Then you wouldn't need a workers' comp policy, and depending if how the entity is filed, if it's filed under the member or executive officer, then you wouldn't need workers' comp under Massachusetts.
Okay, what if they're not an employee, but they're an independent contractor? Let's see, let me read that again. If not an employee, if you have it, can the independent contractor collect, or can independent contractors not receive from the contractor since they're not an employee?
So in the event of a claim, there are several types of factors that an insurance carrier will look into. What qualified, whether if that qualifies under an independent contractor. First, you're going to have to prove that the independent contractor didn't operate under the employer's direct supervision. The second thing that they may look into is establishing the type of work that they perform. Is it normal? Is it outside the normal course of your business? And I think last they would look into is document that the independent business or trade are doing their own kind of work. Those are typically what would separate an employee from an independent contractor. So if it's deemed that the person is an independent contractor, then they shouldn't be covered under the workers' comp policy.
Okay, so to confirm, if I hire an independent contractor such as an online visual assistance for $30 a week, then you don't need to cover them.
How many hours is the independent contractor working per
30,
week?
30.
Oh, 30 hours per week?
Yeah. As a virtual assistant.
And it's under the direct supervision of the employer.
I don't know. That's what I have.
So if it is under the direct, if you are asking, if it's under the direct supervision of the employer, then that would deem them under employee, under the definition of employee.
Okay. Auto insurance. If I'm driving a personal vehicle, and you may have kind of answered this, but let's touch on it again. If driving a personal vehicle to perform consulting services, does that imply the need for commercial auto?
Consulting services. So what, under what circumstance? I think there's a couple of follow-up questions. Is what type of consulting are we talking about? Is the business owner driving from job sites to job sites? If not, if he or she are not expecting any of the clients to sit in their car, or that they're not getting paid for it, the service of driving them around, then that shouldn't fit under the definition of a commercial auto policy.
Would cyber insurance be recommended if you're using a third party to collect the credit card data? For instance, I use a service to accept payments, but I don't handle the credit card information myself.
So I get a lot with dealing with a lot of my restaurant clients. Oftentimes they have a POS system that provides the credit card transactions, and that the credit card transaction company have their own cyber coverage. I still strongly, to answer the question, is I still strongly urge the restaurant owner to get their own cyber policy, because one, oftentimes the third party company has a very low limit. Secondly, they may not cover, it may not be as broad in coverage as you would like. They would maybe exclude a lot of the things. So for those reasons, I would suggest the restaurant owner to get their own cyber policy.
Would that be the same if your customer's data is on a third-party cloud software like QuickBooks?
No. By saying the cyber policy is if, so I'm trying to understand this more. If the, I'm sorry, go ahead, Teresa.
I'm speculating there must be doing some bookkeeping for somebody, is my guess, and that they're using QuickBooks Online. So all the customers' data would be stored by QuickBooks.
I would begin by asking, I'm not too familiar with QuickBooks, so I would begin by asking whether if QuickBooks would provide that data. I mean, that coverage, because I can imagine them arguing, well, did the cyber attack occur in the bookkeeper's own personal computer, or did it attack QuickBooks general cloud? How many people are affected by it? If it's the bookkeeper itself, if their laptop or their computer has been been compromised, then that, I would think it belongs to the bookkeeping's responsibility or liability. If it's QuickBooks software, the data has been attacked, then oftentimes you can probably go back to them. But I think I would start off by asking QuickBooks of what their coverage may be.
Would you recommend a writer that self-publishes teaching materials to have professional liability insurance?
Yes, if they are given advice or consultative advice, then yes, I would say.
I never visit clients and they never visit me. My work is 100% remote. I don't feel like I need general liability, but I heard that I do need to have it if I want to have professional liability. Is that true?
It's not true, but there are some insurance carriers that would ask for both. It depends on the carrier that you're dealing with. Typically, you don't need a general liability in order to get a professional. Professional liability is a standalone, it's a separate liability policy. So if the person is not meeting with anyone, or he or she doesn't have any plans on visiting clients' job sites or workplace, I can't find a reason why the person would need a general liability. Unless, you know, and again, keep in mind too, a general liability it doesn't just cover your slip and falls. It covers, you know, if you are, you know, defamation claims and any wording that's, you know, being protected under copyright and such, as we went through it earlier. So that, you know, there's more to that. But, you know, to answer the question, you don't need a general liability to get a professional.
Here's a good question. How do we know that the policies we pay for will actually pay at the time we need them? What kind of questions, what kind of things, due diligence should a person do to make sure that they have what they need?
So if I'm understanding this correctly, is how can you ensure that an insurance carrier would protect you, would help you recover some of the damages at the time of claim.
Mhm.
So keep in mind that when you purchase an insurance policy, it's a legal document. There are wording there that fills in the responsibility of the insured, which is yourself, that there are certain due diligence that you have to perform, that you have to do at the time of claim. And at the same time, the insurance policy would have a fiduciary responsibility to protect the insured as well. It's a legal document that works both ways.
What do you, I think you might have mentioned this during your main presentation, household workers? And how is that different than an employee?
So household workers are your domestic, like a cleaning person, someone who, like a nanny. Those folks, what I would say would be categorized as the household workers.
Okay. Okay, I'm launching a direct-to-customer high-end furniture brand, and shipping is a concern, i.e. the product actually arriving to the customer and arriving in perfect condition. What does that fall under? What kind of coverage would I need for that?
So you probably would need a cargo insurance, which we didn't really touch on. But a cargo insurance would cover the goods that you're shipping. Now, it depends of which carrier are you using. If you're using folks like UPS, FedEx, you may get insurance through them to protect the cargo, the merchandise. Or you can go through, or if depends on the volume that you're doing. If you're doing a lot of those shipments, you may want to start thinking about, it's probably more cost effective to get your own cargo insurance. But then that comes to, well, what are you shipping, and the cost of the merchandise that you want to protect.
All right, I'm at the last question. So if anyone has any more questions, please go ahead and put those into the Q&A right now. Okay, if I have an outside sales agent selling travel I organize, as well as tours from other companies under my company name, I understand they would be covered under professional liability. If the same agent also has her own company booking tours organized by her business, she would need separate professional liability under her business name, correct?
That's correct. So it's such a gray area too, that if there is a claim that was to occur, was the travel agent operating under your business name or under his or her other entity's name? So it depends what the claim is. So, but to answer the question, yes, they should have their own professional liability policy or other insurance policy that covers the other side of the operations.
Okay. Is there a separate intellectual property policy for an LLC creating and selling educational resources for teachers?
Not that I know of. We can look into this more. Certain carriers would have sort of, again, off-the-shelf policy that can provide certain coverages that could meet the client's needs. But as far as my understanding, I don't think there is one.
Okay. Is it customary for a lawyer to review insurance policies before they take one out with your company? And what kind of lawyer would a client typically look for to agree on policy wording?
There are lawyers out there that specifically deal with insurance wording. And again, keep in mind that when you see a policy, it's a contract. a lot of legal wording that typically we don't all like to read. And that's why it's always good to work with either an agent, an insurance agent, or an insurance broker. You can always have a lawyer review the policy, but they may not be as familiar with the jargon in the insurance world. Typically, an agent or broker would probably be your best bet in reviewing those specific insurance policies.
Now I'm back to the last question again. What kind of coverage for a single employee business consultants usually get? Is it in the thousands, millions, and what can they expect to pay?
What type of insurance policy are we talking about? Or are we saying like what type of insurance they should get and the cost of each policy?
Right. So what kind of coverage to a single employee business consultants usually get? So what would they get usually? And then would it be coverage in the thousands or millions?
Right.
Professional liability, he said. He just clarified. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So for professional, a lot of the times we would start off reviewing the contract that their client it's needing for. Most of the time, it starts off at $1 million limit. Depending on the size of the contract that they enter into, that may reflect the premium that they should be expecting to pay. Right off the bat, if it's, let's say, a business consultant for one person, my guess will probably be anywhere from $1,500 to $5,000 per year. And again, that's for $1 million limit.
Which types does a 4-member LLC with no employees require when the work is writing and publishing?
Sir, can you repeat that, Teresa?
Yeah. Which types of insurance does a 4-member LLC with no employees require? The work they do is writing and publishing.
I would start off with your typical general liability and property coverage. So you can probably get it from a business owner's policy that covers both your liability and your equipment. If you don't have any employees, you wouldn't need workers' comp. Whether if you have an auto that is registered under the LLC, you may need auto, but definitely your professional liability, I would strongly suggest the person to get.
All right. Well, that exhausted all our questions. So I want to thank you, Michael. That was you offered our attendees a lot of information today and a lot of great answers to their questions. I want to thank you for that. I also want to thank everyone who attended, and we hope you have a great weekend and you all stay safe.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.